Well, the numbers are jarring. An unprecedented report by the Ontario Human Rights Commission shows that a black person is 20 times more likely to be shot dead by Toronto police than a white person.
The data proves that black people are overrepresented in police use of force cases that result in serious injury and death.
So here's the breakdown. Black people make up about 8.8% of Toronto's population, but they make up almost 30% of all cases where police used force and the suspect was seriously hurt or killed. And if you just look at the cases where the victim died, they're black 60% of the time.
The size of these racial disparities in and of themselves justify serious research and policy attention.
But Toronto Police and its labor union say the numbers just tell one narrow part of the story. Each case is different.
To be assessing the data, again, without context, doesn't give you a robust or an understanding of what's the circumstance, what is really going on. So I think this is a disservice to having a broader discussion. Still,
the force says it accepts the Commission's recommendations, including looking at ways to collect and report better race-based statistics. But what about the community? As the CBC's Olivia Stefanovich tells us, for many, the numbers simply back up what they've known all along.
Now, for this part, I'm going to need your help. I'm going to say a word, and you're going to say, gone.
These young men are finding their voice at a public speaking workshop, using their racial identity to craft their message.
Worthlessness. Gone. Powerless.
Gone. You can see the badge.
We asked them about racial profiling and discrimination at the hands of Toronto police.
It's just getting worse. And the problem right now, like we were talking about, the community doesn't trust the police. So no, it's no matter, like, there's no more serve and protect. We don't care about that no more. Yeah. It's like I'm scared for my life.
When you're driving around, you see an officer, you get that bubbly feeling inside of you. It's like, I haven't done anything wrong, but because, you know, that whole race has been stigmatized as a bad race.
For so long,
that feeling is also familiar to Randall Adjei. He says he's been stopped so many times without explanation.
My mind just starts racing. I'm just in this space of trepidation where I'm like scared because you just don't know. You know what I mean? You just don't really know what could happen.
Data collected from an interim report by the Ontario Human Rights Commission only confirms what these women say their community has long faced.
I'm dating myself back 35 years. 40 years, nothing has changed. If you're black and you're wearing a hoodie or you're wearing jeans that's a little bit too low, you're going to be discriminated against and you're not going to get help.
For me is when I hear the siren, who did they get or who did they hurt?
We don't know how they're going to function, how they're going to be productive adult when they grow up because they are carrying all the trauma.
Sometimes it takes a tragedy to mend relationships, but we don't have to wait for bad things to happen to be repaired what is already broken.
As much as there is mistrust here, there are ideas on how to make it better.
Just having police, even police with diversity, that's very important.
Police officers are public servants. They're meant to serve. So if we cannot have a say in terms of who becomes a police officer, then I don't know if that's really a servant.
Next, the inquiry will look at carding, police culture and training. But for these young men, real change can't come soon enough. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, that racial disparity highlighted in today's report is something we've seen across the country when police have used deadly force. Earlier this year, CBC compiled a database of fatal encounters with police over a 17-year period. Take a look at some of the numbers. In Montreal, black people made up about 8.5% of the population, but they represented nearly 19% of people who died in interactions with police. And in Calgary, where the South Asian population was just under 7%, they made up nearly 16% of people in fatal police encounters. And it's a similar story in other major Canadian cities. Katie Nicholson has a closer look at some of those police shootings and what's being done now.
Andrew is really a very loving father.
If ever there were a time Sinos Timon thought his nephew would be shot, he figured it would have been when he was a child soldier in Sudan.
Not in a peaceful place like Toronto.
Loku, a father of 5, was fatally shot by Toronto police after refusing to drop a hammer. Loku is just one of the cases of fatal encounters Canadians have had with police, analyzed by CBC News. From 2000 to 2017, more than 460 cases of Canadians killed in interactions with police. In the national snapshot, Caucasians represented nearly half the victims in the database, 46%, which makes sense. Canada's population is overwhelmingly white, 78%. But our analysis found in parts of the country, two distinct groups were overrepresented, Black and Indigenous people. While Black people in Toronto make up about 8% of the population they represented, nearly 37% of the victims. And in Winnipeg, Indigenous people represent roughly 11% of the population, but account for nearly 2/3 of victims. People like Craig McDougall, the 26-year-old, had a knife in one hand and a phone in the other, talking to his girlfriend when police opened fire. Lawyer Corey Sheffman represented the McDougall family when the province looked into his death.
According to the inquest, Craig McDougall died because the police did what they thought they needed to do. According to Craig's family, according to the people who knew Craig, Craig died because he was a First Nations man in the wrong place at the wrong time.
While the numbers paint a bleak picture, Sinos Timon says at least they have people talking.
To understand that these issues are happening and be able to talk and discuss it with open-minded as a community.
And that discussion is now happening at a national level. Since CBC published Deadly Force, our data has been used by academics and police investigative bodies. It's even being used in a public inquiry into law enforcement underway in Quebec. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.